me say Michael does a fabulous job representing you. He is a good friend and a strong leader for Texas. And I'm thrilled to be with you guys. Let me just share a few thoughts for a moment, and let's just open it up and have a conversation. And I'll apologize at the outset that my time is going to be constricted because they've just called a vote on the Senate, so I'm going to...
They were all thrilled that you're voting, so I you don't vote.
We're actually confirming 2 circuit judges, and so we'll get 2 more
That's awesome.
confirmed, which is great. Let me just share briefly, though. We're in a unique moment in time. Historically speaking, unified Republican control of the federal government is exceptionally rare. In the last 100 years, we've had it a total of 4 times in 100 years. Since World War II, we've had a total of 8 years of unified Republican control of the federal government. So this moment is unusual. As we entered last year, to my mind, there were 4 big priorities for the new administration and the new majorities in Congress. They were tax reform, regulatory reform, Obamacare, and judges. My view was if we could deliver on those 4, it would have a profound and lasting positive effect on Texas and the country. And if we couldn't deliver on those 4, it would be one of the greatest missed opportunities of our lifetimes. And much of last year, it wasn't clear which one it would be. I know y'all were frustrated. Michael and I were frustrated that Republicans couldn't get our act together and deliver for much of last year. And then as the year came to a close, something remarkable happened. We saw Republicans come together and unify. And as we look back, the degree to which we've had victories on each of those 4, I think, is quite astonishing. On tax reform in December, as you know, we passed an historic tax cut that is benefiting small businesses, farmers, ranchers, job creators all across Texas. We're seeing the benefits in terms of more jobs, in terms of higher wages, in terms of greater opportunity. I think Texas is benefiting enormously as a consequence of the tax cut. In terms of reg reform, we're seeing practically every federal agency, practically every cabinet secretary, reducing job-killing regulations. And that is a consistent focus across the administration, enormously beneficial, and I think it's having a really positive effect on Texas. As I talk to business owners throughout the state, there's a renewed sense of optimism, a renewed sense of hope as business owners are investing capital, or opening new facilities, or hiring new workers, or raising wages. All of that inures to the benefit of the state of Texas. Obamacare is obviously the biggest unfinished commitment of the Republican majorities. But even that, it's worth noting that we did manage to come together and repeal the Obamacare individual mandate. That's a big deal. That's something in the Senate. I led the fight to get that done. And 6 months ago, Michael can tell you, nobody in this town thought this was possible 6 months ago. It was viewed as simply not realistic, beyond what we could do. And in the Senate, we saw all 52 Republicans come together and unify in December and repeal the mandate. Now, we need to continue working, rolling up our sleeves to finish the job. And that's something I'm working hard to do, and I know Michael is as well. And then finally, judges. Judges, I think, have been an unmitigated success of this new administration. You've got Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. We had last year in the federal courts of appeals, we confirmed 12 appellate judges, which is the most in history in the first year of a president's term. Obama had 4. We did 12. And so I think looking back, the degree to which we've been able to deliver on our promises has been quite significant. And my view is we need to keep working. We need to keep doing more, focusing on lowering taxes, lowering regulations, creating an environment where economic growth is expanding and jobs are expanding. And so that has been and remains my focus. With that, let's just open it up to questions, whatever you guys want to talk about.
My question, you and I met 10 years ago at a Tarrant County Lincoln dinner. We shared a cocktail table with my wife. We had a talk. I just wanted to thank you for what you've done, the growth that you've had. You and I both have more gray hair than we did then, but thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. And look, with the gray hair, I'm fine if it turns gray. I just wanted to stick around. That's my simple prayer, whatever color it wants.
Don't turn loose. Yeah.
University.
Oh, wonderful.
2015 Liberty. So I thought that was really neat. Why did you choose Liberty as your platform?
Oh, Liberty is a wonderful institution. I mean, it is a strong Christian college. It is educating generations of young people, and I think it was powerful to speak out to people for whom faith is real and meaningful and significant. And it was a wonderful, as you know, the weekly convocation with the students all coming together. I mean, it's a wonderful snapshot of, I think, the future of the country. And so that was great fun. I was honored to be there.
What's on the horizon, what you think is doable the remaining part of this year?
So that's a great question. That is something that we are actively in the midst of debating in the Republican conference in the Senate. And there are different views. I think there are some whose views are, we did tax reform, we're basically done, let's coast to the end of the year and confirm some judges. I don't think that makes any sense. So 2 weeks ago, before we left on recess, I did a long presentation to our steering lunch, which is all the Republicans in the Senate. And I laid out several things. Number one, what I started these remarks with, which is how rare it is to have unified control. At the time, this was 2 weeks ago, I said, look, everyone understands there is some real possibility in November we may lose control of one or both houses of Congress. I hope that doesn't happen. I want to work hard to prevent it from happening. But nobody disputes that's a very real possibility. If that happens, it's important to understand what will occur as a consequence of that. If we lose the House, the day Nancy Pelosi is sworn in is the day impeachment proceedings begin. And we will see a dozen congressional investigations as House Democrats go after every single federal agency, unleash scores of subpoenas with the explicit objective of shutting down the Trump administration and preventing the positive progress we've seen the last year and a half. That also means, as a practical matter, if we lose the House, real and meaningful legislation will shut down. That the obstruction and opposition we've seen for the last year and a half only gets amplified and on steroids if it results in an electoral win in November. So what I urge my colleagues is, if that's right, we have, as of 2 weeks ago, we have 254 days from now until January 3rd of next year. We ought to be using every minute of every one of those days. And so what I did is I laid out 30 or 40 different ideas that are bills that different Republican senators have introduced on a host of topics. Whether things like making the individual tax cuts permanent, making the small business tax cuts permanent, making expensing permanent. On reg reform, things like dramatically reining in Dodd-Frank to free up capital to small banks to go to small businesses. Things like the REINS Act, which provides that any federal regulation that imposes over $100 million of cost on the economy can't go into effect without an affirmative up-down vote from Congress. Or things like on Obamacare. We may not right now have 50 votes in the Senate for full repeal. And listen, I'm continuing to fight tirelessly for full repeal. But we clearly have, I believe, 50 votes to do a lot of things on Obamacare. Things like repeal the employer mandate. Things like expand health savings accounts. Things like allow people to use health savings accounts to pay for premiums, which results effectively in a 20 to 30% decrease in premiums. So I laid out probably 40 different bills introduced by different Republican members, all of which I thought had a real chance at getting 50 Republicans together. And then the key is, if you look back at what we accomplished last year, virtually everything we accomplished last year was done through a vehicle that only requires 50 votes, that can't be filibustered. So early in the year, we did a bunch of Congressional Review Act resolutions that repealed Obama regulations that killed jobs. Under the Congressional Review Act, that only takes 50 votes. It can't be filibustered. We did a whole bunch of those. Judges, we're celebrating judges after Harry Reid did the so-called nuclear options. Judges get confirmed by 50 votes now, not 60. The tax bill, our single biggest legislative accomplishment, that was done through a process called budget reconciliation, it only takes 50 votes, not 60. Repealing the Obamacare individual mandate, that was done through reconciliation, 50 votes, not 60. Expanding college 529 savings plans, an amendment that I introduced. It's the most far-reaching, significant federal school choice legislation in history. Now you can use a 529 savings plan, tax advantage, right? It used to be they were just for college. Now you can use them for K through 12 education. You can use them for public school, private school, religious school, parochial school, up to $10,000 per child per year. Huge victory. We got that through reconciliation as part of the tax bill. Opening up ANWR in Alaska to drilling. We've been trying to do that for 40 years. We finally got it done through reconciliation. So the case I made to my colleagues is, look, this is not rocket science. If we have 30 or 40 things that we all agree on and want to come together, we need to tee up vehicles that can pass with just 50 votes instead of 60 so we can actually get them done. So I'll give another specific example. The House leadership is talking about welfare reform. Working to take people off of welfare and back to work. One of the greatest successes of the mid-90s, of the Republican Revolution then, got millions of people off of dependency and back standing on their own feet, back having the dignity of going to work, of providing for their families. Everyone wants that dignity. That's something I think a lot of House Republicans are excited about doing. If we do it through what's called regular work, the chances of its passing, I can give you to the exact decimal point. They are 0.00%. Because it will be filibustered in the Senate. The Democrats will filibuster it, and there's no chance they'll do anything else. So my view is, look, I'm all for welfare reform, but let's do it as part of budget reconciliation where 50 votes can pass it instead of heading into an inevitable Democratic filibuster. So this debate is an active debate within the conference. I think a significant majority of the Republican senators agree with me on this. I had a long breakfast this morning with Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, who's working closely with me. The question is whether we'll do it or not. My hope is we will, and by the way, if this is all predicated on let's take advantage of the opportunity we have because it may end, I am not remotely consigned to losing either house in November. The best way to have a good election in November, to win, to keep the House and grow our Senate majority, is keep fighting and winning big victories that give people a reason to show up and vote. The reason why we have a risk of losing one or both houses is if conservatives stay home. The left is going to show up in massive numbers in November. They're angry. They hate the president. We're going to see record-shattering Democratic turnout. Good news in Texas and most of the states up in 2018, there are a lot more conservatives than liberals. If conservatives show up, Texas will stay bright red. The best way to get conservatives to show up is to win meaningful victories that make a difference in our lives. So that's what I'm urging the conference to do. I don't know if we'll do it or not, but I hope so.
Starts with us doing a budget on the House side. We have to do one in order to get to reconciliation.
Yep.
To start that.
So it's under active discussion. It's obviously this is not easy. It's an election year. Oh, I don't want to vote for a budget because I don't want to declare where I am on this, that, or the other. But that is, yes, you're right. We have to take that step.
That's the vehicle.
And it's easier to do that if there's a vision to where do we want to go through reconciliation. So we did a budget last year because everyone wanted to get tax reform. It's why I started off with the end goal of here's the bills we'd like to accomplish. If we can get excited about what we're trying to do, then all right, let's tee up a vehicle to get there. I mean, that's, I think if we're going to get there, that's the way we're going to get there.
And we'll probably get an indication on the rescissions bill that we'll do next week. And if that passes, then perhaps there will be the institutional courage to go ahead with the budget.
That's exactly right. And what I'll say on that, so in the presentation I did at the conference, there are basically 4 vehicles in the Senate that only take 50 votes. The first are CRAs, Congressional Review Act resolutions. There's some ways to be creative and go after some additional regulations. We ought to be doing that. That's one thing I urged. I think there's good agreement on that. The second is rescissions. So we just got a package of rescissions from the White House, which is pulling back on spending that was previously appropriated. What's potent about rescissions is that they only take 50 votes. The Democrats can't filibuster. So I think it's a great vehicle to be using. The downside is congressional appropriators don't like it. They feel like it's backing out from what they did. We're going to have a vigorous debate. I don't know if we can hold 50 or not in the Senate. I don't know where the votes are in the House, but if we can, that's a tool that can't be filibustered. The third, the big tool that can't be filibustered is budget reconciliation. That's been the one that's carried the most load. And then the fourth is an idea I've suggested, which is using NAFTA renegotiation as a vehicle for regulatory reform. And so I joined with Cory Gardner and Steve Daines, senators from Colorado and Montana. We wrote a letter to the president urging the president to use NAFTA renegotiation to codify regulatory reform. Put it in NAFTA, and then under Trade Promotion Authority, that goes straight to Congress for an expedited up-down vote on a 50-vote threshold with no filibuster. So we could get a huge victory in terms of lifting job-killing regulations incorporated as a part of NAFTA. And so those are the four ways we can get it done, and so I'm urging we pursue all four.
Yeah.
This is a procedural question. There is a possibility Republicans lose the House, but there is a greater possibility Republicans gain in the Senate. Is there a way we could do all these reconciliation type bills in the House, get them passed, pigeonhole them in the Senate until after January, and then vote then, or is that a no-go?
They die on December 31st.
Do that? Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Darn, I tried.
Yeah.
Look, but creative thinking is a good thing.
If the worst of the worst happens and Republicans do...
You're saying the Rockets lose to
Yes.
Golden State? That's not going to happen.
No. Republicans lose the Senate. Will you feel as strongly about creative thinking and reconciliation if the Democrats hold the House and the Senate?
Sure, I'll think it's a terrible idea. Look, this is a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
One of the problems is, so if you look at it, we've had, in the last 100 years, we've had unified Republican control 18 years out of the last 100, although 10 of them were in the early 1900s. Democrats have had unified control 40 years of the last 100. If you look at what Democrats do, they actually believe what they're saying and they fight for it tooth and nail, relentlessly and effectively. It's one of the reasons, by the way, in the Senate, I personally would end the filibuster rule altogether. That, by the way, is a relatively new position for me. 3 years ago, I didn't agree with that. So if you'd asked me 3 years ago, should we end the filibuster, I would have said no. And the reason I would have said no is that historically the filibuster has proven to be a conservative tool and that it slows down the movement of the Senate. And usually not having the federal government grow dramatically is a good thing. Since World War II, we've had 3 Democratic supermajorities. First gave us the New Deal, the second gave us the Great Society, the third gave us Obamacare and Dodd-Frank. We end the filibuster, every Democratic majority is suddenly a Democratic supermajority. So those consequences are significant. Why have I changed on that? The reason I've changed on that is 2 things. One, the level of Democratic obstruction we're seeing now is completely unprecedented. Today, Washington Democrats are filibustering everything. Virtually every nomination, virtually every substantive bill, there's just a constant blue wall where their answer is hell no to everything. That has no precedent in how the Senate's operating. But secondly, I no longer believe the filibuster would bind the Democrats. I think the instant they get a majority, they'll end the filibuster. And it doesn't make any sense to me that it's a one-way constraint, that it only ties Republican hands and not Democratic hands. So, look, the tools I'm suggesting, would the Democrats use against us? I think they'd use it in a heartbeat. And frankly, what I would probably object to is on substance. My guess is they'd be pushing policies that are harmful. But they're going to do it. They take these matters seriously and actually want to enact the policies they want. I want to see Republicans have the same seriousness of purpose that we're going to follow through on the promises we made to the American people.